We'll go ahead and get started for this edition of Training Tuesday. This week, we're going to talk about the difference between an emergency and a small purchase with emergency conditions. That can be a little tricky. We had a couple questions regarding that recently, so that'll be one of our main topics. Also, we're going to have a new course offering for you called Introduction to Illinois Procurement. We're really excited to announce that class that we'll be offering soon. Um, and then our monthly bid buy training is this Wednesday, and our bid buy practice sessions will be this Thursday. Then our fun fact of the day and quote of the day. So let's jump right into our emergency versus a small purchase with emergency conditions. So this is important because they are two separate procurement methods, right? But many times they can get a little confused with each other, or kind of the way that we talk about the procurement methods can get a little jumbled sometimes. So we wanted to provide some clarification for you guys today. So first couple like just high level things. Where this was coming up was to be sure that you're double checking your type codes in BidBuy. We found that some um, type codes were not appropriately selected, and so and then it kind of just in more conversation we decided, hey, let's talk about this a little bit more. So for instance, if you're doing a small purchase with emergency conditions, make sure you're double checking that type code in BidBuy that it's not selected as an emergency because it's a small purchase, even though it has emergency conditions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But that's really important from the BidBuy side because of reporting when your agency wants to run reports. Also, remember the BidBuy or the bid tab in BidBuy interfaces with the PPB clearinghouse. And so that information that's being pulled over from the bid tab and from bid buy to the PPB clearinghouse is going to show that, for instance, it was a small purchase, it was an emergency, right? So if we selected the wrong type code as an emergency, but it was actually a small purchase with emergency conditions, it's going to show up in the PPB's clearinghouse as having been an emergency, when in fact that wasn't the case. Okay, so that's something just to be aware of. But they're two completely different methods there. Don't use emergency when it's a small purchase with emergency conditions. We also talk about these things sometimes. We'll say, I've heard this phrase, a small emergency. Um, Now, in the case that I was that I was involved with, they knew it was a small purchase with emergency conditions, but sometimes you'll hear it as a small emergency. Well, is it an emergency or is it a small purchase? We want to have that delineation there because there are different procurement requirements for each one of those procurement methods, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So a small purchase with emergency conditions must still meet one of those four conditions for an emergency. If you're on, just think of it, you're on train tracks, you're on one path or the other. You're on one track or the other. Either you're on the emergency track or you're on a small purchase track. Now you have those little subsets below a small purchase, which could be a small purchase with emergency conditions. The other situation we have is a small purchase with sole source conditions. So a few more notes regarding this. So on an emergency, the agency declares emergencies, and then for a small purchase with emergency conditions, the SPO approves that procurement method. Similar to a small purchase with sole source conditions, the SPO will approve those above $10,000. Now, if it's less than $10,000, that's still going to be a part of your agency approval. So that's going to be approved by your APO. And then you're going to remember to, you'll want to attach the small purchase designation memo as a part of that procurement file if it's less than $10,000. Many times we don't necessarily know in an emergency condition situation whether it's going to be less than 10, over 10. If you get in a situation like that where you estimate that it might be less than $10,000, but it ends up being greater than $10,000, those are going to be kind of a case by case basis. But if you get close to that $10,000 estimation, I would go ahead and reach out to your SPO, make sure that they're aware of it, because if it is above $10,000, again, remember, all of those procurements above $10,000 are going to require SPO approval. So just another opportunity for us to discuss reaching out to your SPO, getting your SPO involved as soon as possible. So follow all the procurement requirements for the method utilized. So going back to what we were talking about, is this an emergency or is it a small purchase, right? So many times we talk about it being a small purchase with emergency conditions. Now I do want to say too, sometimes there can be a little confusion when we're talking about these two procurement methods, but that there may be a miscommunication or something where an agency can't do a declare an emergency for less than the small purchase limit. That is not true. You can do an emergency, of course. You declare the emergency. It could be for less than the small purchase limit. It's just if it is less than the small purchase limit, which is currently $105,600, you do have the option to do a small purchase with emergency conditions. However, the big takeaway here is if you do an emergency, meaning you declare emergency, you need to follow those requirements for that emergency. It doesn't matter how much, what the value is of that emergency. You could declare an emergency for $15,000, but then all of those other procurement requirements kick in. So it needs to be posted to bid by within 5 days of the award of that emergency. The SPO needs to file with the Auditor General the emergency purchase statement within 10 days of that award being or that contract being awarded. If it's emergency, work can begin prior to having a fully executed contract, right? However, this is where I think the confusion comes in sometimes and between an emergency and a small purchase with emergency conditions. With a small purchase with emergency condition, you need to have an executed contract before work can begin. Okay, I think sometimes we may think, well, it's an emergency, so work can begin. It's all in the vocabulary that we use, and so if we're thinking that it's an emergency when it's really a small purchase with emergency conditions, sometimes work begins before you actually have a contract in place. That's a no-no, right? Um, and so you may be, you may end up getting in a situation where you need to do a late execution waiver if work started prior to having that contract fully executed. Also, if you're doing a small purchase with emergency conditions, you wouldn't follow the requirements for a full-blown emergency. So there's no need to file with the Auditor General in that case. So again, it's really easy, and we understand how the two procurement methods can be confused with each other. But just remember, if it's an emergency, you're following that emergency track. If it's a small purchase, even though if it's small purchase with emergency conditions or small purchase with sole source conditions, you're following the small purchase procurement method. Okay. And of course, if you ever have any questions regarding these things, reach out to your APO, SPO, reach out to me, and we can make sure that you get those answers for you. So specifically for bid buy, just a couple notes here regarding our small purchase with emergency conditions. So there's no job aid that's specifically for small purchase with emergency conditions. You would just follow the small purchase job aid, whether that's under $10,000 or above $10,000. There are some notes that are specifically on the job aid if it's a small purchase with emergency conditions or a small purchase with sole source conditions. So a couple of things just to kind of pull them out. You add it in the bulletin description that it's a small purchase with emergency conditions. You uncheck electronic responses, right? Because we're not really asking the vendor community for responses. You check enable rolling enrollment. Enable rolling enrollment allows you to open open the bid and do all the bid tab activity prior to that bid opening date hitting. You're going to mark no to that small business set aside question because if it's a small purchase with emergency conditions, it's no longer set aside for our small businesses. So there's all these little things that kind of kick in if you're utilizing that small purchase with emergency conditions procurement method. Also, you're only going to add the vendor being used. Normally on your small purchases, you go in and you're selecting all the bidders, all the vendors that are small businesses under that NIGP code first, right? That's not going to be the case, so that's noted on the job aid as well. Every once in a while, we'll get that question. Um, hey, where is the job aid for a small purchase with emergency conditions or small purchase with sole source conditions? So we don't have a separate job aid for that. Okay, so this is a topic that we'll probably come back to every once in a while. It's something that pops up in real life. And again, I think it's really important just to understand it's one or the other. It's either an emergency that then you follow all those procurement requirements, um, or it's a small purchase. And if you have any questions regarding that, reach out to your SPO or your APO or to me. Okay, make sure I didn't miss any questions here. All right, so moving on to our next slide, we're happy to announce a new course offering. It's called the Introduction to Illinois Procurement. It's going to occur on the first Wednesday of each month. So, we have our bid buy monthly training on the second Wednesday of each month. We'll begin to roll out a course here. It's called the Introduction to Illinois Procurement. It's going to begin on that first Wednesday of each month, starting November 3rd. It will be at 9 a.m. We estimate that it's going to be about 2.5 hours with a short break in the middle. So we'll do about an hour of content. And it's going to be and then we'll take a short break, come back and finish up before lunch. So it's going to be a high level view of Illinois procurement. So this is going to be perfect for anybody that is new, fairly new to procurement, or anybody that would like a refresher course. But it will be a 10,000-foot view on some of the topics for our intro class. So who's involved in procurement? We talk about all the different players. What are their responsibilities? What are the procurement methods that are available via the procurement code? Communications reporting with vendors, vendor requirements. What does a vendor have to do in order to do business with the state of Illinois? The small business set aside program, our unified procurement program, and our joint purchasing arm of CPOGS. So we'll touch base on a lot of different topics without doing a real deep dive on any of them. So again, it's great for anybody that's new to procurement. We understand that procurement can be a bit of a maze, and this will kind of we'll talk about where everybody kind of fits, what they do in a procurement, how an agency conducts a procurement. It's not going to be specific to bid buy at all. We'll touch on it a little bit here and there, but this is a procurement training. A lot of our trainings that we do just invariably end up having to touch bid buy, but we're going to be looking at adding more training specific to just procurement. So we are going to require registration. So if you are interested in joining our class on Monday, November 3rd, email cpogs.training@illinois.gov to receive all of your registration info. And if you have any questions regarding the class, feel free to reach out to me. And we'll send out some reminders over the next couple of weeks, but that will begin in November. Okay, so tomorrow, speaking of bid buy training, we have our monthly bid buy training, which will be all day long. There's some information here. If you notice, I made one slight change to our timing. It's not a big change. We'll still start at 9 o'clock. Um, then we'll go to 10:30 will be our second session. Previously that second session started at 10:15, and just we found that we wanted to be able to give a slight break between the first and second session, so we bumped that back to 10:30. Then we take a break for lunch. We'll do small purchase over 10 at 1, take another short break, and then do release off master training at 3 p.m. So here's the information. You can also always find it on our calendar of events on the CPOGS page. You just have the link. For the bid by training, registration is not required. Simply just click on the link and join us. And you don't have to attend the entire day. However, if you are new to bid buy, this is the training, or you're wanting to gain access to bid buy, I should say, this is the training that you need to attend. And so if in order to get access to bid buy, you need to attend all 4 sessions. So that way you get a good broad overview of bid buy training. And then the next day, so this Thursday, we'll have our bid buy practice session that'll be available. And so that is going to be on the second and third Thursday of each month. This is just an informal thing. We've talked about this quite a bit over the last couple months. This has been well received, and so you don't have to attend tomorrow for your bid buy practice, or excuse me, you don't have to attend tomorrow in order to join us on Thursday if you already have access to bid buy. It's just a great way we can share screens, we can walk through examples. It's a little more informal, and we want you guys to be able to actually get in and practice in bid buy. Whereas the training on Wednesday, it's more Derek Reeves and I showing you how we walk through the system, overview, introduction to the system, all that sort of stuff. Okay, and then we have the links in the training center on this slide because the second and third Thursday sessions do have different links. And you don't have to register for our practice sessions either. Simply just click on the link when it's time. Okay, no questions yet? All right, and here's our slide to our links to our Training Tuesdays. If you are new to our Training Tuesdays, I highly recommend you going back and taking a look at our past videos and slides, kind of get you caught back up. All of those are here on that link on our Training Tuesdays page, as well as uh, the CPOGS calendar of events, which has information regarding our bid buy training links. Okay, so our fun fact of the day. So if you're anything like me, when you're a kid, you saw Jaws and it freaked you out, and then you never wanted to go into the ocean again. But actually, there is a very, very, very low statistical risk of dying from a shark attack. So, what are these other things that actually cause more human deaths than sharks do? Deer, jellyfish, taking a selfie, which I thought was kind of crazy, but apparently there's a lot of things where people get in dangerous situations trying to take a selfie. Falling coconuts, actually falling out of bed, hot dogs, mosquitoes, roller coasters, the list goes on and on. Um, and that's our fun fact of the day. And then our quote of the day. Lou Holtz, the amazing football coach. Your talent determines what you can do, your motivation determines how much you're willing to do, but your attitude determines how well you do it. Always a big fan of Lou Holtz. Even though I wasn't a big fan of Notre Dame, but I always liked Lou. All right, if you have any questions, please reach out to cpogs.training@illinois.gov. And everybody have an amazing rest of your week. Thank you so much.